In the early years of the internet, it was a different landscape. Back before there was Steam, Game Jolt, and all other places indie developers shared their games, there's something called Shareware. In this episode of Retro Docs, we're going to talk about the history of Shareware. The start of Shareware can be attributed to three individuals. Andrew Flugelman, who in 1982 created a program called PC Talk, where he shared it with his friends and family, but then figured out he could put a message in the program periodically asking for $25 for further program updates. At the same time, Jim Kapoof, or Jim Button, created a program called Easy Write, and also asked for donations to help pay for further updates to the program. However, it wasn't until 1983 that the concept of Shareware was created by a former Microsoft employee by the name of Bob Wallace. Shareware really took off during the height of the popular underground practice of pirating software, since most of the software packages at the time were very expensive to the average consumer, often costing in the hundreds or more, and employing copyright protection to prevent piracy. The whole idea of writing a high-quality program and sharing it with your friends and hoping they would open up their wallets to offer you money for updates sounded like a rather ridiculous idea at the time. But it made Flugelman and Kapoof millions, with Kapoof saying that at one point he was getting stacks and stacks of inquiries. The idea of using a bulletin board system to distribute software was appealing to developers, since it would limit all the hoops they would have to jump through, and the huge price tag their program would have if their program made it into stores. And developers could be independent and in their home, and often the manuals to the programs would often be included in the software itself. And getting out updates was as simple as mailing a blank floppy disk. Soon the concept of registration codes came about, which is with an electronic payment or mailed-in payment, you get a code to completely unlock the rest of the program, which also dropped the price significantly. So now that we know the start of Shareware, let's look at some of the most famous Shareware programs. We can't talk about famous Shareware programs without mentioning the program that started it all, PC Talk, or more specifically the third version of the program, PC Talk 3. There was also PKZip, which was a program that would compress files to a size that made it easy to transmit from computer to computer, and it paved the way for the zip file. Shareware wasn't just for IBM PCs, it was also used for Apple programs as well, and because of that, Mac users soon had their version of PKZip called Stuff It. So today, the name of Epic Games and Fortnite are household names, but did you know that a small little Shareware program was the start of it all? Yes, a program called ZZZT in 1991 paved the way for them to get their start and paved the way for the Unreal Engine. Of course, for those of us that grew up in the 90s, we can't forget one of the most famous Shareware games of all time, Doom. In 1993 was the most famous first-person shooter that came out then. As bulletin board systems soon gave way to the dawn of the World Wide Web, a program known as Netscape became a free-to-use web browser that became available via Shareware, allowing people to browse the web for free, and also soon became one of those pesky programs that you often see in your checkout counters back in the day. One of the most famous unzipping programs was first known as a Shareware program called WinRAR in 1995. It allowed files to be broken up into chunks. And lastly, the most famous of MP3 players used on PCs back in the day, known as Winamp in 1997. As the internet began to evolve, the idea of Shareware was soon being phased out as developers could create a website and offer people the ability to buy it directly by pinging and get the program instantly, or try before you buy, with the dawn of free trials and demos. Soon the dawn of open source software came about. That is where developers could collab and create a program and share it for free, thus making commercial software less popular. And soon the rise of DRMs and app stores came about, which made programs linked to individual users' accounts, which made sharing programs illegal and often impractical. Now, indie developers have a lot of ways to distribute their stuff, such as Valve's Steam or sites like GameJolt or itch.io. In a way, Shareware is still around, it's just evolved over time. Though the classic version of Shareware titles might not be around, however, there are places where you can still find them today. Here are some of the places on the internet where you can relive the glory days of Shareware. RPG Classic Games. Here you can find a list of classic DOS games. DOS Game Archive, a source for all DOS games and Shareware games. The Cave BBS file system. This was one of the most famous bulletin board systems back in the day, and the author of it has kept a collection of Shareware that he had on it. Shareware CD-ROMs on the Internet Archive. The name says it all. The biggest collection of anything from the internet has its own shareware collection. I do have to warn you though, that some of the stuff on here is not really safe for work, so beware of that. Text File CD-ROM Collection. Archivist John Scott has a massive collection of shareware CD-ROMs that you can browse and download. Again, I do have to warn you that some of these titles are not safe for work. For you Mac fans, there is a Macintosh repository which hosts a bunch of shareware Mac programs and other Mac software. And finally, the University of Michigan Archives, a large archive of shareware titles for PC, Apple, and other formats. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so I finally remember the age of shareware. It was the way I get introduced into first-person shooter games like Doom and Duke Nukem. Shareware wasn't really just for games and programs. I also remember a lot of bulletin board systems had some not safe for work stuff that one could download too. However, you had to prove that you were over 18 at the time. Shareware to me is a part of how games are developed today and paved the way for stuff like Steam, GameJolt, and itch.io, where indie developers can share their stuff. Anyway, I'm Paul saying peace out and stay frosty.